everyone, and thank you for joining our session this afternoon. My name is Sharon Hanlon from Bristol Myers Squibb, and I lead a group within our clinical trial operations organization called Clinical Trial Engagement and Enrollment. Within our team, we focus on bringing the voice of our sites and our patients into our clinical trials through connecting around our clinical trial experience, as well as looking for ways to increase access to our clinical trials through recruitment and other methodologies. This afternoon, we're going to talk about our recruitment tool, BMS Study Connect, and a really interesting and exciting project that we did with patients. We worked closely with a group called CISCRP that we'll talk with later on in this program about their experiences and really learned a lot about the patient's perspective of working with our Study Connect tool. So what is Study Connect? Study Connect is Bristol Myers Squibb's global platform dedicated to raising awareness around clinical trials. We're really looking for ways to enhance the patient's experience through learning, potential participation in our trials, as well as engaging with patients, their caregivers, healthcare professionals, and others interested in the clinical trial journey. Visitors to Study Connect can learn about clinical trials, find a clinical trial that could be a good fit for them or someone important to them, as well as connecting directly with clinical trial sites that are participating within Bristol Myers Squibb studies. We started the Study Connect journey back in 2011 at BMS, where we wanted to establish a way that we could connect our patients directly with our ongoing clinical trials. To have a presence so that they could learn about the clinical trial, what a clinical trial is, what the clinical trial experience was, as well as the clinical trials that BMS was actively recruiting for. We've had a few enhancements along the way. In 2015, we did a major enhancement where we expanded some of our digital capabilities. We also upgraded our platform, as well as expanding Study Connect's reach beyond the US to countries such as Canada, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. We expanded again in 2018 to a current version where we look to really build a much more connected experience for patients. We added an online patient community where patients could connect with other patients in clinical trials. We also expanded our global reach to include much more countries and are still to this day exploring the possibility of expanding even further. Today in 2020, and we'll share the results, we decided as a company to look at a user experience with Study Connect. So we gathered feedback from patients and we'll be looking to do some additional improvements to Study Connect along the way based on that feedback. This slide just describes our country reach for Study Connect, as well as the line along the bottom really just describes when how we added additional countries along the way, as well as we added a call center, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So Study Connect, at least our vision is that it be a connected patient experience where patients can be educated about clinical trials in the conditions that BMS is researching. We can also connect patients with clinical trial sites where they're able to pre-screen for ongoing clinical trials, as well as provide some referrals for consideration around participation in a clinical trial. and then engaging with patients and caregivers through an active call center, as well as videos about the clinical trial experience, and looking for ways to support the clinical trial population through advocacy groups and other connectivity. How is Study Connect used? So this just describes, as you saw on the first slide and on the slide that's depicted here, the screenshot that's depicted here, a patient would journey to Study Connect. Patient is able to find information about particular trials by typing in either the indication that they're looking for or the condition. They could be connected to clinical trial sites through referrals or active screening, as well as connecting with physicians and other people active within the clinical trial. One special feature that we looked to embed within Study Connect was the ability to screen for additional studies. So if I'm a patient with a particular condition that there wasn't an active study for a condition that was on Study Connect, patient could be connected with studies that are active from other sponsors. So looking beyond the landscape of BMS clinical trials, studies that are being offered by other pharma companies or other active research entities, and connect the patient that way. It'll take them back to clinicaltrials.gov, but it still presents some opportunities for other trials that a patient could be potentially participating in. So we talked about Study Connect being a tool for education, and here we just described some of the potential opportunities to learn about clinical trials. There's videos that patients are able to watch, or other stories and topics that could be explored, as well as looking for various conditions of study within Study Connect. This is probably one of my favorite features, is really fostering connections with patients. Patients learn from patients. Having attended some of the sessions on the GVCC earlier today, just seeing the connectivity among patients and the way you learn from each other and share your experiences. We wanted to be sure that that Study Connect had an opportunity for patients to share their story. We have several videos out on Study Connect where you can learn about the experiences within a clinical trial. We've also added a feature in terms of what are you thankful for, looking at ways that patients can share what they've learned through the journey and how that has created a sense of thankfulness around their experience. So we have several vehicles that visitors to Study Connect can explore to learn more, to gain more insights in terms of providing them help and direction. We've got a series of frequently asked questions with answers that we're able to provide. You can also submit new questions that we could, someone from BMS can get back or populate that question on the site. We've got a dictionary that of different terms around the clinical trial experience that provides translation or descriptions around popular terminology that people are looking for. And lastly, support organizations through the advocacy groups that BMS connects with along our clinical trial activities. This provides some direction and some places for patients and their caregivers to explore connectivity with these groups. So I had mentioned earlier, with our current version of Study Connect, we explored the addition of a call center. So we have partnered with a company called PharmaCentra to establish a dedicated call center. The call center representatives are available to address questions around clinical trials, The important thing, they're specific to the US and Canada for an active call center experience. And the call center representatives are able, we have access in English, Spanish, and French, and the phone number is listed on this slide. For patients outside of the US and Canada that are active on Study Connect, there is email support. So if there are any questions, they're able to enter their questions and receive an email follow-up response outside of the US and Canada. So this slide just depicts an example around a protocol page and some of the content that are included. We will provide a brief description of the study. We've worked to ensure that the study title, which is often a challenge for patients, is in lay language. So really simplified language to really enable patients to understand the title of the study. There's also some key participant information, so a participant guide for some of the important aspects that are need to know. Study treatment options, so both what the arms of a study look like, as well as the potentials around the drug formulations that'll be utilized in the study. Some of the key eligibility criteria for the study. So, what are some of the things that are important for us as far as the study population is concerned, as well as those exclusion criteria that are potential limiters for patients to be able to participate in the study. From a location perspective, the study protocol page will also provide a site map around the sites within the United States or other country that is being explored, where those sites are located, and whether or not they're actively recruiting for patients. So in terms of the pre-screeners, there is an ability to trial match for the study to really see if, based on the condition that the patient has, that there is an adequate alignment between the criteria as well as the patient. So the patient or their caregiver are able to complete the pre-screener questionnaire to identify potentially suitable trials for the patient. The patients are, again, as I shared earlier, patients are presented with both BMS studies that are actively recruiting, as well as if they were a match, they'll present some non-BMS trials that may be open in the condition that they're being considered or that they're investigating. And as I shared earlier, non-BMS trials will be linked to clinicaltrials.gov. Patient referrals. So if a patient, excuse me, chooses a clinical trial, so based on the completion of the pre-screener, there will be, if there's a clinical trial site, based on some early criteria that the patient or their family member would put into the system, it would establish a mile range in terms of sites that are available in their general location. There are other ways you can adjust the mileage as well to open it up a little bit further for patients. But ultimately, if a patient is a match for one of our active studies, they'll be able to choose a clinical trial site to commit or to submit, excuse me, their contact information. Once a patient completes the form, they'll receive an email confirmation. In addition, both BMS and the site will receive that confirmation so that we're all connected as far as the availability of a trial, and the patient should receive follow-up contact from a representative site. If you want to continue to follow, patients are given the option to continue to follow their condition by creating a Study Connect account. Accounts can be created to follow the condition, can follow individual trials, but also follow individual clinical trial sites that are in their neighborhood. So this just provides an opportunity to keep the journey going as far as continuing to explore what's available within their individual condition. So in summary, some of the features around Study Connect that in our view help enhance the patient experience are just captured here. So learning about clinical trials, depending on, you can learn by your role. You can search for active clinical trials using keywords if you know the study number, if you know a location of one of the sites. Answer some pre-screening questions, view details and see a map of actively recruiting sites, follow conditions, trials, sites, and get email notifications if there's any changes. Register at participating sites through the pre-screening mechanism, and get some answers to questions. If you saw your physician and you heard a terminology around a clinical trial that you didn't completely understand, it certainly provides a resource to give you an option to get some answers. And then to call the call center. We certainly want to be sure that it is a customer-focused experience and that patients are able to learn as much as they can around the clinical trial. So Study Connect is really, we hope, is really helping patients as well as our clinical trial sites in a number of ways that are listed on this slide. Certainly providing value in terms of information, connectivity, finding potential trial matches, and certainly continuing to give patients options. I don't know why it keeps advancing, so apologies. But maybe it just wants us to go and have our conversation with our friends from CISCRP. So as I'd shared at the beginning of this presentation, we have really been on a journey with Study Connect, and one of the things we've really been looking for is how do we continue to make Study Connect more meaningful for patients, by giving patients, caregivers, and our healthcare providers the information and the tools that are most important. So within our team, we've developed a relationship with the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation, CISCRP for short. They've been a really great partner to us to really build the journey to build that connectivity with patients and their awareness of the clinical trial process. So we decided to pursue this user experience study where we worked closely to identify some patients that the CISCRP works with. We really wanted a diverse set of patients to get a lot of different perspectives around the use of Study Connect, and explored getting their feedback on the experience. And the next steps, is, at least as far as we're concerned, is taking some of that feedback to really optimize the experience of patients looking for a clinical trial. So with that, I'm going to introduce our friends from CISCRP, Annick Bruin and Jessica Cronin, who will be talking with me. We have sort of a little fireside chat. We're setting the mood for a conversation with our friends as far as learning a bit about the user experience study and some of the things they learned, and looking forward to them sharing with us along the way. So welcome, Annick and Jessica, and maybe just to start out, if you don't mind introducing yourself and maybe a little bit about CISCRP and the work that you do on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this, this program. My name is Annick de Bruin. I'm the Senior Director of Research Services at CISCRP. And Sharon, you said that acronym perfectly well.
Awesome.
We go by CISCRP for short because it's a mouthful. But we've been around. We're an independent nonprofit organization. We've been around since early 2000. And we're really dedicated to raising awareness and educating patients and the public about clinical research. And all the employees at CISCRP are personally very passionate about that mission. There's several different ways that we engage patients, and some of you may be aware of some of our different programs. Aware for All is actually a community-based event that's free of charge for members of the public to attend, and it's really an opportunity to bring people within the local community together. And prior to the pandemic, we actually, hold these in person, but for now we've converted to a virtual format. But it's really an opportunity for the local community to become aware and educated on what clinical research is. And typically we bring together experts in the field to share and educate people. We also bring together, Sharon mentioned earlier, the patient testimonials and how important that is. We also have, people that have participated in a clinical trial come and talk and share about their experiences as well. And there's also free health screenings as well during these sessions. We also have some other activities that we're involved with. We do patient advisory boards, which some of you in the audience might have already been part of, but that's really where we work together, oftentimes with companies like Bristol-Myers Squibb or other pharmaceutical companies to get together and really help co-create, if you will, either materials that are patient-facing, or talk about clinical study designs and ways to make it easier for people to participate and minimize the burden of participation, and really gathering their insights and really making the future experiences of study volunteers better. And then we also have a lot of educational materials and other items that just support clinical trial participation and help inform patients and the public about clinical research. We've had the pleasure of working with Sharon and her team at BMS on this particular project, which was really exciting. And I'll turn it over to you, Jessica, in a moment to introduce yourself as well. Jessica had a wonderful, was the project lead for this, and had the pleasure of interacting with some of the participants who provided their feedback here. But we've worked with Bristol-Myers Squibb in the past on several other projects, patient advisory board meetings as well. The Clinical Trial Patient Experience Summit we were part of, and more recently we're also involved in we call it the Perceptions and Insights Study, which is a global online study that collects opinions over time among the public and patients about their experiences with clinical research, as well as their perceptions and how this might change over time. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you for a brief intro, and then we can continue.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Cronin, and I am a project manager at CISCRP. So I work closely with Annick. And as part of my job, I get the pleasure of working with patients and caregivers in various different patient engagement projects, such as surveys, patient advisory boards, as well as interviews. And so I had the pleasure of being the project lead on this user experience interviews with the BMS Study Connect, and talking with the patients individually. So I'll share a little bit more about that as well.
Great. Thank you both for the introduction and for the great background around CISCRP. So if maybe we jump into the user experience a little bit more. I know one of our prerequisites for the user experience assessment was that we get a diverse set of patients. And I know one of ours is always, at least trying to get patients that have prior clinical trial experience. So maybe can you talk about your process for patient selection and how and who the individuals were selected?
Of course, great question, Sharon. So CISCRP, for the outreach for this project, we conducted outreach among our CISCRP community, as well as we leveraged various relationships with patient advocacy organizations to help determine eligibility, but also individuals who are interested in providing their feedback. And so, as you mentioned, Sharon, we really looked for a diverse set of patients. So we had some oncology patients as well as survivors, so with breast cancer, lung cancer, bladder cancer, as well as melanoma. And we also had participants within the autoimmune disease sphere as well, so with Crohn's and lupus, to again provide that diverse perspective. And so there was a mix of ages with individuals ranging from 30 years old, so maybe with some more technology experience, to late 70s. And so really getting not only that wide range of ages, but also the wide range of technology, because individuals who will be using Study Connect have diverse backgrounds and maybe diverse experiences with technology. And so we also looked for ranges in gender. So among the group of participants, we had 3 males as well as 4 females. We also looked for diverse geography, so across the US, and then also as well as a mix of races. So we had 2 individuals who were African American, and the rest were identified as Caucasian. And as you mentioned, too, looking at individuals with clinical trial experience and knowing that not everyone who comes to Study Connect will have clinical trial experience. And so among the group, 3 individuals had previously participated and the remaining 4 had not. However, no members of the group had experience with a BMS clinical trial.
Right.
And so, yeah.
No, that's great information. And how did they feel about participating? Did you collect any kind of overall patient satisfaction or other input that they enjoyed? That was kind of a different experience.
Yeah, so from our experience, not only with this project, but other patient engagement projects, is that patients love to be involved in any capacity, and really allowing that opportunity to shine light on their experiences and their feedback is so valuable and really appreciated. And so all of the participants were very highly engaged, and they love providing insights and feedbacks from a perspective that maybe you and I might not have. And then also, I know from talking with the individuals too, they love seeing the results of their actions and love seeing the results of their feedback. And so really seeing their thoughts and ideas getting put into place is something really meaningful as well. So overall, everyone was thrilled to be a part of the project.
And Annick, earlier when you described, some of the work that CISCRP has done, how do you go about, really ensuring that you pair the right patients with a particular task?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. So typically we work closely with the sponsoring organization to really first work out, what are your objectives? What are the key things you want to learn? And then identify, and then go from there and match the right person or community with that particular project. We do go through a pretty extensive screening process. We usually develop, a screening interview, if you will. And even if someone meets, the criteria of, let's say, geography or whatever, we do make sure that they're comfortable sharing their experiences, especially with maybe a small group, given the setting that we're planning on conducting the research in. So again, we really, take the time to have a good conversation with the person before we say, all right, you're a good match. But as Jessica said, we typically, people are so excited to be part of these types of initiatives. And I know we'll talk later a little bit more, but, it's really important for it to be a two-way dialogue, so it's not just like a one-time and done type exercise where you don't communicate back what actions you've taken as a result of their input.
Yeah, oh, that's great. That's great. So Jessica, going back to the user experience project, what do you think was most important to the patients in our experience with Study Connect?
Yeah, so looking at some main themes across the 7 interviews that we have, all individuals appreciated visual representation of information. So as you talked about, having icons or pictures to go along with that information was really not only adding words to the text, but also highlighting that as well and having a reference point. And so having images, icons, but also making sure the layout of the information was really simple and clean and also easy to navigate. And that was really highlighted as a key point when examining all of the information. And then also when looking more closely at Study Connect, participants were really drawn to the pre-screening feature that you mentioned previously, but then also sharing protocol information as well as the feature of finding a site location. And so looking at there are clinical trials that are available, but are they close to me, and what's near me, and what would that look like? And so individuals and patients that we spoke to also really appreciated that study details were provided at a high level. And again, with the icons and the minimal text included, so that right away when they looked on that page for more information, they said, oh, hey, that's me, I would be eligible or I wouldn't. And so just having that information readily available. But then also looking at the options of having the trial details, so the different treatment options, as well as the eligibility criteria. And then also one thing that really was called out and spoke to the majority of people was the option for the pre-screener. And again, just that individuals, as they went through that pre-screener, they were able to see if the study was right for them. And so many were initially drawn to that feature to go through, and most found it to be very simple and an efficient tool to help determine their eligibility. So rather than shuffle through a bunch of different protocols and different options, they could complete the pre-screener and find out if something would be a good fit for them. And so, as you mentioned too, there is the option of having non-BMS trials in addition to the BMS trials, and that was among the group really stood out and was very much appreciated as well.
Good, good. Do you want to share? I know you brought us a couple examples. Do you want to walk through those examples for our audience?
Yeah, I can.
I can share. Yeah, I'll share again. Thank you.
So looking first at really identifying a clinical trial and what that looks like for patients or caregivers as they navigate through BMS Study Connect. Patients suggested they really were drawn to that information was available and that they were able to find relevant trials without much significant difficulty. As some people had experiences in the past navigating through clinicaltrials.gov and reading through different options. And so this was a nice change, a breath of fresh air. But some individuals found slight hiccups with searching for some results that would not show the recruiting trials first. And so that was really an area of suggestion, was having recruiting trials first. And so they liked knowing what was in the works, but they also liked knowing that there were trials readily available for them to partake in. And also, but they also wanted to spend maybe a little less time clicking to find out trials that they might qualify for. But again, that really goes back to the pre-screener and how that was much appreciated. And so looking at the BMS Study Connect and when talking with individuals, really some suggestions to help improve it from the patient perspective were to include, again, like I mentioned, the recruiting studies first, and then also to put pertinent study information up front that might be really important to someone who's considering participating in a clinical trial, or the phase, as well as start and end dates. So having that information available. And so we have a quote from a male lung cancer patient who we spoke with, who just said what he wants to know more information and what are the criteria for him. And sometimes when looking for a clinical trial, it's like finding a needle in a haystack. But so that was really the feedback from identifying a clinical trial, Sharon.
Great, great. And I know this was another example around our pre-screeners.
And so, as I mentioned, so the pre-screeners and the pre-screen results were very important, and a lot of individuals were really drawn to that ability and really appreciated it. And they liked that they would be not only offered clinical trials that they were eligible for from BMS, but also clinical trials from other sponsoring organizations, and felt that that was a really nice touch. And so in the quote that you see on the right-hand side, so the one woman who was a breast cancer survivor and also had MS, she said that speaks volumes to me. And it's just so important that they're trying to match patients with trials that are right for them. However, some people found that this feature, often the pre-screener, was a bit long as well as complex, and that some of the questions were a bit repetitive and didn't count for information that was previously inputted. But again, so some recommendations from the group were really to retain the ability to show non-BMS trials, because that was, for multiple people, that was an incredible feature to have. And then also to just really, moving forward, refine the questions that are being asked. And so looking at the logic of the questions, but how they're structured. Although most in the conversations appreciated the detail of questions being asked, because then the results that were given would be more accurate to them and what they would be eligible for.
Great, great. Okay. So I guess from my perspective, or from a sponsor's perspective, what do you see as areas that we need to take more focus when providing patients? So if a patient is considering participation in a clinical trial, what are some of the steps we can take to ensure clear expectations for the patients, as well as what information are patients looking for up front? I leave it to both you and Annick, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I think that's a great question. And I think especially upfront, and that's something we ask all the time, what information do you need to make a decision? And we look into and we ask people, what kind of, who do you consult with also? And when you're making a decision to participate. So I think, one is deliver the information that they find important to make that decision. And which is typically, they want to know the study purpose, what are some of the risks, the benefits, what's the study drug, how does it work, what has it been through prior phase studies, and what are those results? Obviously, the physical location of the site, and I know we'll talk through barriers in a moment, but that's a significant barrier always. Any expenses, the visit schedule and such, and basically how participation is going to fit into their daily routine. And there's a wide variety of different ways that you can, obviously deliver this information, whether it be printed videos. We talked about those patient testimonials, those are huge, and really helping someone understand what it's like to be in the shoes of someone that's gone through the process. So those are just some ideas on ways to deliver that information.
Yeah. And Annick, I'm wondering, one of the things that I know, as someone, I've been in this for a lot of years, as I'm sure you have, despite our best efforts, we always seem to have very small numbers of patients in our clinical trials. What do you see as some of the key barriers to patients being able to be recruited for the study, and then once they are recruited, keeping them in a study longer term? What do you see as some of the impactors that affect
that keep people in there? Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of you probably in the audience are aware of these barriers, and now even more so in the environment that we're in. Yeah. But certainly, like I mentioned earlier, always the first question is, where's the clinic and how far do I have to travel? And how much time do I have to take out of my day to get there? How long are these study visits, and how often are they? So those are, and obviously, concerns about side effects and health, et cetera, are all, always a barrier. Yeah. Awareness is another one. Although in today's environment, and we'll be interested in doing our 2021 study and really seeing what kind of differences we see with this pandemic, because obviously now there's a lens on clinical research in general, and just to see what kind of impact that might have on awareness. But we know for a fact that the doctor is such an important resource. That's a channel we really should leverage and provide the doctor the information so they know what trials are ongoing in their community, and they can start those conversations with their patients.
And what do you see as some steps we can take to increase participation? I know we're all looking at programs to enhance our recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, certainly, decentralized clinical trials, although, which means that, some visits may be remote, or it may be completely remote, having mobile nurse visits, et cetera. Those are some of the ways that we can increase access and accessibility. But there's also some other issues related to trust, particularly in underrepresented communities, that we need to overcome as well. Rebuilding that trust, based on some historical events, building those connections with local communities can certainly help there as well.
Those are great. And I would invite the audience members that are on, please feel free to enter into the chat. We'd love to hear your experiences as far as participation in a clinical trial, any barriers, and I think even more importantly, what can we do to enhance the clinical trial participation and experience? And while the audience is typing in their chat features, I'd be curious, we use the term engagement a lot within my group's name is engagement and enrollment. So what does patient engagement mean to you? Maybe we'll start with Jessica.
Yeah, so to me, patient engagement really means having the patients as partners. And so being a part of that process from start to finish. So whether that includes doing interviews, like the user experience interviews and having that feedback, or getting thoughts on patients' voices being heard, and having them as a partner throughout the process. Annick?
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, it's really all about, involving the patients and co-creating, anything, related perhaps to educational campaigns, not only study designs, developing and determining what relevant endpoints are and outcomes, and certainly maintaining that engagement post-trial as well, and making sure that, the journey certainly doesn't end with the last study visit. It's all about returning study results to participants as well, and conveying our appreciation for their contribution, but also enabling them to be able to understand how they contributed to the process.
Yeah, and we use the term patient first a lot, or putting patients at the center of everything we do. What does that mean and to you, and what kind of steps do you see us taking to really mean what we say?
Well, I mean, I guess I can speak to personally, and everyone at CISCRP, is very passionate about putting the patient first. But when you get, for example, project teams from a sponsoring organization, let's say for a patient advisory board, and they can listen to, someone sharing their experiences, it's something that's really impactful, and they bring that back to their work. And kind of, it kind of infiltrates everything that they do, so it's, everybody has to have not an incentive, but everybody has to take it back to what they do and kind of live it,
Yeah. Something that motivates them, kind of the core.
Yeah, exactly.
And what tools or methods do you see as kind of successful approaches to enhancing patient engagement?
Transparency, number one. I mentioned that two-way dialogue, not doing projects that are kind of a single touch point, if you will, and just maintaining a more of a longer term relationship, and getting involved even beyond that with local communities, building those relationships there. I mentioned working with healthcare providers to increase their awareness of local trials being conducted in their own communities. I mentioned returning plain language summaries back to study volunteers as well is huge.
No, that's, I think those are some important areas. In making the case for engaging patients as true partners in the development experience, how do we show patients that they're valued in the clinical research process?
By taking their input and showing how you've applied it. And it doesn't mean, and it's all about setting expectations too at the start. We always say that in the beginning, not everything that we talk about today and that you suggest will be implemented, because sometimes it's just not possible or not feasible at the moment.
Yeah.
So just, having an honest conversation about that, but staying in touch and if you can show them some of the actions that have been taken as a result, such as in the Study Connect project, that's huge. And not only motivating, and it's very motivating for the people that were involved in the project.
Yeah. And I can agree with that. I think we've had a lot of really good interactions, certainly some with the CISCRP team around some of our clinical trial activities. But anytime you can connect with patients, I think it's really important to get their input and get their feedback. And it's been of huge value. And we've seen whole procedures removed from some of our protocols because of the feedback from patients. And I think the challenge we have is our protocols are getting increasingly complex as the science of medicine gets even more complex. So I think these have been some great examples. I'm curious, and I'm sure some of our folks listening, about the impact of COVID. I know we're looking at different ways of approaching our clinical trials to make them more user-friendly, and so COVID we're all remote. I think all of us are far from our offices, and I'm sure same with the patient experience. But what kinds of things are you hearing from your patients around the effect or impact COVID has had on their ability to participate in the trial?
Well, from what we heard anecdotally, it does create a little bit more hesitation, obviously, because they put themselves at risk when they go to the clinic. That's why, I think technology and those remote models are really important to help, address some of that and making them more at ease. But, taking or assuring them that all the precautions that are being taken, like, for example, when you go to your doctor's office now for a regular visit, and being assured that those same precautions are being taken when they might go to a clinic visit is helpful to help overcome some of those concerns. We know that, some patients back in the spring were perhaps, not, maybe some trials were put on hold, or, they were not interested in enrolling. And nowadays, if they're assured of all the protections and necessary precautions are in place, they're much more comfortable. And I just saw that in the chat, there's a great comment here from Jessica about the misinformation that's out there currently about clinical trials. And that's one of the hugely important things, because, and we see it in a lot of the interactions that we have with our patient community. The more you educate, the more comfortable they feel. And it'll change the perceptions that they have also of, clinical research in general, but also the pharmaceutical industry. And it'll definitely change their mind. So Jessica, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And are there key tools or other activities that, hindsight is always 2020, that we could have been better prepared for the challenges that COVID presented?
Well, I think what was interesting is that before the pandemic, our industry was looking at, doing remote, decentralized trials, but the ramp up period was going to be a lot slower. Yeah. And, I remember talking to patients before about, decentralized clinical trials, and they were like, well, I really feel more comfortable seeing my doctor in person. And there's still people that feel that way. And having that high touch relationship. So I think the good news is that, the pace of adoption has accelerated.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of companies have quickly pivoted to that type of model, which is good.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one thing we're all hoping. I think the speed that we were able to implement some things, we don't always address things in a quick. We're always conservative to a certain extent, looking for ways to move things along a little more quickly. I think it has been a great learning from COVID. Even the speed with which protocols have been moving through the reviews and the like.
Well, there's a lot of misconceptions around that as well, right?
Yes,
The
yes.
development process. And to Denise's point in the chat, who mentioned the trust factor, it is a huge issue,
Yes.
especially now, especially with the speed of the development. But again, we come back to education. If you better understand the clinical development process, then you understand that, there's no corners being cut.
Yep.
There's just, maybe things are being done in tandem or whatnot. So that's a great point.
No, it's great. And what do you see as keys to maintaining engagement even after the patients enrolled? I know we spend a lot of time focusing on recruitment and ways of awareness, but what's the important, some important takeaways to keep the patients engaged throughout the study after they're enrolled and prevent them from either moving on or just continually encouraging the ongoing participation.
I don't know, Jessica, did you want to comment on this one, or?
Sorry.
I have a couple of ideas as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that keeping that window and keeping that opportunity for connection available.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's been a month or a few years since the clinical trial, but still having that point of contact or someone to reach out to is just, even if the participant doesn't necessarily utilize that information, just having that window of opportunity available is really valued.
That's great.
And you can also, do a patient experience survey, kind of like a patient satisfaction survey during at several points during the trial, and beyond, of course. That's another way of maintaining engagement and keeping them apprised of, progress along the way in terms of the overall study.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, returning study summaries.
Yes.
Another one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Those are important aspects. So I know we're coming up on time. Wanted to see, I don't know if there's any final thoughts, things you either of you want to share with the folks that are on the meeting.
Well, I would encourage you to get involved. Getting involved in clinical, in the process, or in patient engagement, if you will, is not necessarily limited to participating in a clinical trial. There's many different ways of getting involved and volunteering. Certainly I mentioned patient advisory boards panels. That's one way. We have another way, and maybe Sharon, you can speak to this as well, but we also have opportunities to be part of an editorial panel for our study summaries, where you might read a study summary and be able to provide feedback in terms of, whether it flows and it's clear, et cetera. So again, there's many different opportunities to get involved beyond clinical trial participation.
And Jessica, I don't know if you see Jessica's question.
I did see that. Yeah. So basically, yeah, absolutely. So we actually, if you go on to the CISCRP website, there is a section if you want to be contacted or be part of the CISCRP community, and it gives you an opt-in, several different options, and it'll say on there, I want to be contacted for a patient advisory board. So if you just check on that, we can send you the link.
Send the link.
Yeah. Or Jessica, if you can do that, that'd be great. The contact. Yeah. So there you go.
Good. And Jessica, want to give you a chance. I don't know if there was any final thoughts you had.
I just wanted to say too, going off of what Annick said, just listening to and hearing patients and their perspectives is so invaluable. And we really appreciate everyone who's involved and who does participate in making sure that their voices are heard, and just their willingness and openness to share their feedback in such an honest and candid way is words and just very appreciated.
No, that's great. Thank you both. I really appreciate the time and you know, certainly you guys have always made it very easy for us to work with you. So definitely appreciate Annick and Jessica's input. For the folks that are on this particular meeting, we do have a Study Connect booth that you can go out and explore and learn more about Study Connect up close and personal. And you know, certainly, you know, we welcome the involvement of patients. I think if you know, as this whole conference, you know, is really focused on hearing from patients, and so we're really grateful for the input. Done some great work with Grit and want to continue it going forward. So thank you all for choosing to listen in, and have a wonderful rest of your day, and enjoy the rest of the GVCC. Lots of really great content. So enjoy, and thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.